Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to many corners of the world. I'm Catherine Marshall. I'm with the Berkeley Center at Georgetown University, but also I'm the Vice President for the G20 Interfaith Forum Association. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the first in a series of webinars that are focused on the fast approaching G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro that takes place in November. What we are focusing on are priority recommendations that the G20 Interfaith Forum, on behalf of a network of global religiously focused communities, have made to the G20, to the leaders of the world, on what they see as critical priority recommendations. So there will be 5 webinars over the next weeks at the same time, same place. So today we are focusing on a very critical issue that has a very high priority for the government of Brazil and for other governments, which is ending hunger and addressing the issues of poverty. And we have a remarkable panel with us today. Their biographies are on the websites, so I will not introduce them in any depth. But what we will do is we will go through essentially asking the questions: why is this an issue? What does religion have to do with it? How does it fit into the agenda that Brazil, the government of Brazil as president of the 2024 G20 has presented? And what do we as a collective recommend and propose as next steps? So that is the order. Please do raise questions. We're unlikely to have time to address them, but we will address them afterwards. And this session is being recorded, and the video will be available shortly on the websites of both the Berkeley Center at Georgetown and the G20 Interfaith Forum. So with no further ado, let me introduce the Reverend David Beckman. He is with the Circle of Protection, and he's also the founder and chairman emeritus of Bread for the World. So with a very long and I would say dedicated commitment to the issues that we're talking about today. David?
Well, thanks for organizing the forum, and I appreciate everybody who's watching today. Thank you for your interest. I mean, to me, it's just pretty obvious that helping people in need, helping hungry and poor people, is a priority for all the world's faiths. Faith communities are often active in helping and sometimes speaking up for hungry and poor people. At the Interfaith Forum held in Brasilia a few weeks ago, it was really wonderful to see the extent to which the UN Sustainable Development Goals, grounded in a commitment to end hunger and poverty, they're just built into the lives and spiritualities of spiritual leaders from all different traditions in all parts of the world. I find it really important to first remember that the world has made unprecedented progress against hunger and poverty over the last several decades. In 1990, 4 of every 10 people in the world lived in extreme poverty. Today, about 1 in every 10 people in the world live in extreme poverty. This has been an extraordinary liberation. I see it as a great exodus in our time, an experience of God. It teaches us something about the fundamental character of humanity and the planet that we live on. And I believe that God, however you name God, that God wants us to keep it going. But progress against hunger and poverty has in fact stalled, and in many respects, it's been reversed. But we've had a lot of experience. We know a lot about how to get progress against poverty going again. Our main problem is that governments and people of the world now have other priorities. The basic problem is a lack of political commitment. People of faith can help to change that situation. First, by teaching our communities, our religious communities, about the importance of social justice. In fact, many religious people are oblivious to social justice issues, and quite a few are opposed to social justice. So we've got some work to do on ourselves and people we worship with. Second, people of faith can help to create political change through elections, of course. That's really important, but also by joining and supporting organizations, advocacy organizations, for example. This year's G20 summit will launch what I see as an international advocacy organization, an international push organization, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. President Lula, who has a record of reducing poverty in Brazil, has proposed it. And the G20 governments at the ministerial level have unanimously agreed to launch this new global alliance against hunger and poverty at the Heads of State Summit in November. A speaker from the Brazilian government will correct me, but the way I read the documents, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty has two basic purposes. First, this alliance will help to develop a political drive to get the world back on track toward the end of hunger and poverty. In joining this alliance, governments and other institutions will commit themselves to specific programs of action to reduce hunger and poverty. And the alliance will be governed not by, I love the name, it's not a board of directors, it's a board of champions. The board of champions, it gives me a sense of that it's not, that they have a different role than just oversight. Second, the alliance will facilitate international support for large-scale, country-owned, evidence-based action to reduce hunger and poverty. So the way I gather this will work is that, let's say Mozambique has had a success with some approach to agricultural development in part of the country. The alliance will go to institutions like the World Bank and say, you know, you said you wanted to help. This government has a really promising program here, help to provide the finance, and go to other institutions that have knowledge about what works, maybe other governments that have done similar things and had success. And so the alliance will help to bring to bear international finance, international experience in support of governments that are trying to, that have sound plans to make progress. The G20 Interfaith Forum learned about the plans for the Global Alliance. We heard from people in the Brazilian government who are have taken the lead in putting the plans together. And the Interfaith Forum was enthusiastic about what President Lula is proposing, what the G20 plans to launch. And so we hope that the participants in this seminar will join us in trying to get our own governments to make statements of commitment and join the alliance, preferably as founding members by November, and also just join with us in publicizing what this alliance is and what its launch can mean to the world.
Great. Thank you very much, David. I think you've set the scene for what we see as a global alliance where the religious communities are a vital part. Let's turn now to Saulo Seolin, who's with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Brazil. He's sadly not in New York with his president right now, but is very much involved in the design and the launch of the alliance. So could you tell us a little more how this has come out of the Brazilian presidency and the priorities you see?
Sure. Thank you, Catherine. It's an honor to join you today. Thank you very much to Reverend David for that great scene setting. I think it was a great introduction. It saved me some time here as well on my presentation. So I will just give you a very brief about the status today of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and then I'll just say a few words about the role that faith communities can play in relation to it. I am assuming that you know already a little about the Alliance. I've read the excellent brief prepared for the Brasilia Interfaith Forum in August. It had very useful information, some of the most useful graphs that I wanted to show you here today on the design of the Alliance. And David also, I think, presented a bit of what the Alliance intends to do. That was right on point, and I totally agree with what the way he presented it. So this will be more of an update. The first important thing to say is that the foundational documents of the Alliance have been unanimously endorsed at a ministerial meeting on 24th July in Rio. So the documents are published online on the G20 website. I can send them to the organizers if you'd like. But just quickly, the 4 documents are the Ministerial Declaration, which I highly recommend. I think it's a very good summary of what the G20 and other partners involved think about this issue in a summary way. We also approved the terms of reference and governance for the Alliance, the criteria for policies that will be included in the Alliance's basket of policies, and the templates for the statements of commitment, which is the instrument that needs to be presented for a country or partner to become a member. With the approval of these negotiated documents, the Alliance is now open for countries, including countries outside the G20, and for other partners to join. And I take this opportunity to invite you all to evaluate the possibility of having your organizations formally join the Alliance by presenting a statement of commitment. This is not a requirement, of course, and there are many other ways that you can collaborate without formally joining, but there are some advantages too, including being able to follow up more closely on the work of the governance mechanism that David mentioned, the Board of Champions, for example. The Global Alliance will launch in November at the G20 Leaders Summit. And before that, what we are doing now is preparing for the G20 Social Summit, which will be on the days right before the Leaders Summit. And we will have a few slots reserved for us for preparing events around what we're calling the Sprints 2030. And the sprints are an effort to gather Alliance partners around a few selected policies from the basket and push for early results. We want to be able to showcase the capacity for mobilization and for mobilizing funding also under the Alliance. We want to show that the Alliance can have practical results and that it will not be just a decision on paper. The themes that we have chosen for the sprints are some that have an overall agreement, pretty much consensual view that they are key and that they can be effective for having results on hunger and poverty. They are school meals programs, cash transfer policies, family farming, early childhood and maternal care, social protection policies, and water resilience. You are very welcome to join these efforts as well. And just to end, just a few words on the relationship between faith communities and the Alliance. I think that David already also introduced the ways that you can cooperate and you can collaborate with this effort. But I think it's important to say that we want to go beyond just providing food, just go beyond charitable work. We want to address the root causes like debt, like conflict, inequality, and the impacts of climate change. And we know that faith communities already do a lot in this area. And, whether it's through organizing soup kitchens, food donations, but also advocating for policies to protect the vulnerable. You have a deep connection to the issue. I think we have a great alignment on this issue. And we want to tap into this experience. And the idea behind the alliance is very simple. We need everyone working together around these proven evidence-based policies to be implemented at large scale. And of course, the alliance says that it wants governments to take a leading role, but we know that governments can do it alone. And faith-based organizations often lead not only in this charitable work and direct support, but also pushing for systemic change. You can push for advocacy. That's what the alliance is mainly, I think, a political drive. It's a political effort to bring light to these issues that have been a bit forgotten on the international stage because of competition with so many issues on the agenda. So there are many things that you do already, such as supporting smallholder farmers, creating resilient food systems, focusing on the need of children, for example. And we can together prove that hunger is a problem that we can solve. There are solutions. Your voices, your networks, and your trusted position in your communities can make a real difference. Your help in building the alliance is very much welcome. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's very informative and very helpful. Let's turn now to Asma Latif, who I think is in New York and who has been working on the ideas behind the alliance and the alliance itself from a global perspective now for many months. So Asma, could you give us your perspective?
Thanks very much, Catherine, and really great to hear your updates, Saulo and David, for setting up this discussion really well. So I think it's worth saying that it isn't every day that a G20 presidency puts hunger and poverty at the very center of their agenda. This is really significant. The last time there was a global hunger initiative by the G20 was 15 years ago in another food crisis. And here we are at a time where, yes, there's a food crisis, but there are also a number of compounding crises, and people have been calling it the polycrisis. So this is really significant because it puts the attention on the opportunity that we have to come together as a global community to address hunger and poverty. As Saulo said, the solutions are there. It's a question really of the political will. And with 5 years left to the SDG deadline, this is just an absolutely terrific and I think huge opportunity for all of us who care about these issues to rally behind the leadership of President Lula and the Brazilian G20. And I think, it's really incumbent on us to also make sure that this is not forgotten as the G20 changes hands in December. We don't have time for more new initiatives every year. We really need to focus on what works and going to scale. And that is really the opportunity presented here. I wanted to just mention a few things that the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, where I work, and our coalition partners through Hungry for Action are doing to raise awareness about the Alliance in the coming months to get civil society in countries engaged and knowledgeable about the Alliance so that they can encourage their governments and then also hold them accountable to the commitments that they make to the Alliance. So we are circulating an open letter right now, calling for world leaders to sign on to the Global Alliance with our partners at World Vision and Hungry for Action. We have more than 100 signatories to date, and we will continue to build that, use the open letter to raise awareness up to the G20 summit in November. And tomorrow we are hosting an event with World Vision. I'm sitting in the office down the hall from Andrea. So looking forward to that event that's coming together tomorrow afternoon in New York. And the idea behind that is also to raise awareness about the Global Alliance amongst the missions in New York. There are so many issues that are being covered, and this is really we don't want this to get the opportunity to get lost here. The second point I wanted to make is really around accountability. As I said, there is a propensity of initiatives, and I think the goal of the Alliance is to bring alignment and coordinate and collaborate and foster greater collaboration. And I think for the next 5 years, that's what we really have to do. It can't be several competing initiatives and UN agencies and multilateral development banks. This is about alignment around a set of proven, evidence-based, scalable interventions and alignment around prioritization and financing. And so as faith communities and civil society, I think there's a lot we can do to encourage countries to stick with it and to really ask the hard questions over the next few years and follow up with subsequent G20 presidencies on how this is going and what we can do better, and just making sure that we stay focused. And the final point I'll make is really around financing. Obviously, there's a lot of money in the pipeline. It could be spent better, and the Global Alliance policy basket gives really good guidance on how you can spend that money better. But we need more resources to go to end hunger and poverty and malnutrition. So we have some significant opportunities this year. The IDA 20, the World Bank's soft loan window, IDA 20 is going through its 21st replenishment. The pledging moment for that is in December. It's really important that we need to align and make sure that we have a robust replenishment for IDA, and that we are making sure that IDA is focused on the priorities that are part of the Global Alliance. So there's a big global push on IDA 21, calling for a very robust replenishment. African presidents have called for $120 billion replenishment, which would be historic. I think it's incumbent for us as advocates to really get behind a robust replenishment of IDA. So I'll stop there and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Asma. One of the questions, of course, is what do the religious communities bring that is distinctive? I never use the word unique because that's tricky, but I think there are many distinctive aspects. And in this case, essentially, the idea is that the religious communities form a very central part of this global alliance, but bringing specific assets, if we can call them that, to it. So Andrea Kaufman is with World Vision and has been very much involved in these issues. She was also in Brasilia for the G20 Interfaith Forum and has worked on these issues from, I think, different perspectives for some years. So Andrea, can you address this question of what you see the religious communities bringing to this global alliance?
Yeah, it's great. And it's been great to hear from others, because I think we've already touched on many of my key points. But I want to start just by naming a few children. So there's a child in my daughter's class named Xavier, and they don't have school meals because it's like a preschool program. No. And oftentimes his parents will forget to send him a meal, and maybe they'll drop off something like fast food. So he's one kid. There's a little girl named Maria in Mozambique. The only meal that she is guaranteed each day is a hot meal that she gets at her school lunch through her school lunch program. There's a little girl in Nicaragua named Ana, and while she has food herself, she expresses concerns because she sees peers who don't have access to fruits and vegetables, which they're learning about in school, the importance of a diverse and nutritious diet. And then Fatuma in Somaliland, who really eats maybe one meal a day since the drought has impacted her community. And I think for me, taking a step back and thinking about these individual children who are impacted by this global hunger crisis, by this global nutrition crisis, is really important. And it's also something learning about the value, the infinite potential, the dignity of each of these children is something that I learned in the context of my own faith tradition. That each of these children are, in my faith tradition, we would say, created in the image of God, with unlimited potential and ability to steward that potential to serve their families and their broader communities. And I think as we think about faith communities, we think about individuals and communities that are on the front lines with these children, whether it's in a mid-sized, relatively affluent city in the United States or in Somaliland. There are children, there are families, there are communities who are experiencing hunger and lack of access or affordable nutrition. And so as I think about the role of faith communities, we've touched on many of them. First of all, I think we have an enormous opportunity to come alongside President Lula and the Global Alliance to End Hunger, which really is a bold leadership. And we can look at all the statistics, but we really want to celebrate and build on the role that faith communities have had in these transformative approaches. One of the pillars of the Global Alliance is knowledge. As faith communities, as faith people in all over the world, we have knowledge. We take action. And as I think multiple people have said, we're also advocates. So faith communities are on the front lines addressing urgent needs. They can often identify the most vulnerable, those who are outside of accessing nutritious food. And they are able to deliver those services. So during COVID-19, World Vision did a survey of faith leaders kind of through WhatsApp. And after spiritual support, the number one thing that faith communities were providing were food packages, meals, all kinds of things. And we know that's true. We've heard reference to soup kitchens, these emergency, more urgent needs. But faith actors also faith actors and communities are also stewards of the lands made up of smallholder farmers. Faith communities are promoting regreening, nutrition smart agriculture, climate and nutritional solutions that promote health of the people and of the planet. One example we see in our World Vision work is farmer-managed natural regeneration, which is the simple act of regreening, so taking tree stumps and bringing them back to life. It's this amazing process, but that leads to not just regreening and the carbon-related impacts of that, but also greater ability to grow nutritious crops around it, livelihood and economic opportunities that increase people's ability to purchase food in local markets. And in one community in Kenya, we saw a 31% increase in household food security year round, just from the simple act of FMNR. So we see faith communities championing these efforts that work, stewarding the lands, and then we see faith actors as social mobilizers and policy advocates for sure. I think Asma referenced the open letter. We'll make sure in the notes a link to that gets to you if you want to sign on. I think that's a great opportunity to come alongside the Global Alliance. We also heard about the opportunity to make commitments as organizations. I think faith communities, faith-based organizations, thinking through what is the unique or distinctive, to not use the word unique, Catherine, opportunity, a contribution that we have to make in this. And sign on to the open letter of support, start advocating in your local context, think through what does a sustainable solution look like for us locally. The policy basket, there's a number of things where we already see faith actors really active. For example, in school meals in Uganda, faith actors were really essential partners in understanding the challenge of hunger in some local communities, advocating for support and delivery, and in some cases actually being the ones that provided the school meals in the context of the local public schools. We see things like that in many contexts. I think it's a great opportunity for partnership. And then finally, between now and December, 4SD and World Vision and Sun, a growing group of partners are promoting these nutrition dialogues. The opportunity for local communities to come together to talk about what are the challenges we're seeing and what are solutions in our nutrition in our context, and that will all build to a global report for the Nutrition for Growth conference that's happening in March in France and beyond. That's kind of the first and primary use of that information. We really want to see faith communities involved in that dialogue and in those conversations. So we'll also include a link in the follow-up on that, just for some opportunities, some real tangible ways to ensure that our voices are heard, to advocate for the change we want to see, and really be part of the solution. Because children like Xavier and Maria and Anna, they have unlimited potential. Like our world needs them, and that. Not having the nutritional support that they need now will have implications for them for their whole lives. So we have an opportunity, and I hope we can respond together. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I think you've really brought us back home with names and people and the importance, but also a sense of the diversity of opportunities as well as challenges that makes, I think, this issue of hunger a complicated one, because it's not just one thing. It's not just providing food, but going, as Saulo was saying, to some of the root causes. So we turn now to Sir Samuel Zan Akalogo, who is in Tamale, Ghana right now, where the power is going off and on, as we understand it. Sir Zan is with Caritas Africa, another of the faith-linked organizations that are so deeply involved in these issues. Unfortunately, despite the remarkable leadership of Brazil, hunger will probably not be ended by November when the G20 leaders meet. So one of the big questions first, as it has always been in the G20, is how is Africa involved? In other words, and now Africa has the African Union as well as South Africa's coming presidency. How is Africa involved, and how is Africa's leadership on this issue taking shape? So, Sir Zan, over to you.
So thank you, Catherine, and special thanks for the kind words. I must say I like the flow of this conversation. Really, I like it. Beginning with David setting the big overview, and Saulo coming to give the public policy imperatives of this and the need for policy coherence, and Asma also giving us some more or less the context of the G20 Global Alliance against hunger and poverty. And now we also had some case studies from Andreas, brilliant. And so what I wanted to do was basically to contribute to this conversation by just giving some highlights about the nature of food and poverty in Africa. And let me say that I will speak this time like a farmer, because that is what I am. I will speak like a villager, because that is where I grew up. And I continue to have my roots in rural areas. And as you say, I am speaking from northern Ghana, Tamale, where if you're talking about poverty indicators, and food deficit in Ghana, this is the location of it. So having said that, let me say that for us in Africa, many communities, one would say that it is really food that gives identity, that defines the identity of the people. Okay, so food is very much an integral part of the culture of the people. So food has everything to do with the people, the worship of the people, the festivals, the marriages, the funerals, name them. There is none of these social aspects of life that in Africa that you don't have food at the center. So that's just how important it is. And that is why when we talk about food in Africa, you would realize that in rural communities, things are beginning to shift because, of course, there has been too many disruptions in the world, including systems and community lives. Generally, people grew what they ate. They grew, they cultivated what they ate and what they made use of. So that is why you look at the farming systems in Africa and many villages, and it was not monocrop, no, not one single crop, but different types of crops for different purposes. And that is where we talk about food sovereignty. So in other words, it is the access, the justice of the food system that defines their being as a people, and that defines their cultural reality. Now, it's a bit of a pity that food somehow has become so commercialized. What that means is the family-based farming systems in Africa are breaking apart, and in fact, the policy support to rural farming systems are also collapsing. And of course, there are other bigger issues that affect food and agriculture generally. So with food being commercialized, it then means that if families are not able to produce their own food, you have to have the income to be able to buy the food that you need. And that is where the issue of poverty also comes in. Because when you talk of absolute poverty, where the definition is around people lacking the resources that will meet their food needs, then you can see that once it is commercialized and the income levels of rural communities are not such that they will be able to meet these foods, and yet the domestic farming system is collapsing because of other broader public policies, then the villagers, rural people come under very serious threat. Now, how is this affecting many people in Africa? The first one is the food poverty, as I have mentioned, because then people start to buy food that their money can just afford. So it means they are no longer by eating food that gives them their identity. Of course, it means that they are no longer able to get the food that helps them to participate in social life. So the festivals, the other social recreational activities, marriages, funerals, etc., are all impacted because of the food deficit and the commercialization of food. Another important thing that sometimes maybe in the Western world you don't realize is that the food deficit and the loss of food is also affecting the sacredness of African people. Because as I said earlier, the shrines, Africa's shrines, or the rituals or the sacramentals of their worship all depend on food, different kinds of food, where you can say at this festival, you use this food to reach out to your ancestors. Now, with all of this, it's also then creating the breakdown in families, because with the food deficit, and I can speak for my own village, the last 10 or so years, anytime it comes to the dry season, people have to migrate. They are forced to migrate to southern Ghana just to be able to get something that they can cope with. So that's just how important the issue of food is in Africa. So we cannot talk about it as if it is a single isolated issue. It has all kinds of ramifications that affect the people. So in policy consideration, you need to look at policy coherence that deals with the issues comprehensively. You also need to deal with what we referred to just a while ago about the root causes. Why is this happening? How can we attend to that? And that's why, having given this background, let me say that looking to the 2025 Jubilee year, Pope Francis basically called for a reform of the financial, public financial architecture that, creates more poverty for poor countries. And this affects their food basket as well. And so in the Jubilee year, we as Catholic actors would want to put the issue of food at the center of the campaigns. It is also important for us that in Africa, in 2025, South Africa is taking over the presidency. And for me, it is important that this agenda of global alliance against global alliance for food and against hunger is something that will be sustained by South Africa, because this is a critical issue. The last point I wanted to make has to do with Pope Francis' own teaching about poverty and the environment and people and what they eat. And so some of you may have heard about Laudato Si, where people say the encyclical on the environment, but it's more than that. He says that the cry of the poor is the cry of the earth. So these two are linked, and we cannot talk about food without talking about how it impacts on the environment. Again, he proposes in Fratelli Tutti the need for all faith-based organizations to unite together to address global problems like the issue of food. And I think these are very important things that we need to look at. And faith communities, we have the muscle to ensure that public policies become more proactive, become more responsive to the needs of people. And in this case, I think that food must be an important consideration in all the discourses. I would like to end here, as I said, basically giving some broad highlights about the specific context of Africa and why food is so interrelated to many aspects of social and economic life. Back to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Surzan, and I really appreciate very much the way that you have managed to tell the story of food in a way that links to the sacred, but also to family structures, to migration, to daily life. Next week, in the second of these webinars, we're focusing on what historically has been a centerpiece of the G20, which is the issues of finance, global architecture, so debt issues, tax issues, but increasingly tied in intricately to that, issues of climate finance and approaches to the climate. So that is the second issue. And to give you another preview, we'll also look to the environment, where the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative is a fantastic example of faith engagement on a central issue for the climate, then at human trafficking, and finally at some of the issues that have been alluded to here of social cohesion, of basically how do we deal with the polarization and the anger that seems to be dominating so much of the discourse in the world today, and move towards understanding and the kind of cooperation that the Alliance is calling for. We have a number of questions which we will address And in addition, each of the people has committed or has promised various documents that we will be picking up. So we are paying attention to them. Question of whether we're looking at girls, I think the answer clearly is yes. Looking at the issues of corruption and governance, they're inseparable. But with that, let me turn back to David Beckman, who I think has already stirred us with his call to action, but perhaps you can amplify or round us out with some of the things that drive you and that have seen you take this in the Circle of Protection, in Bread for the World, and in other alliances as a very central issue. Over to you, David.
I thought that was just great. People should know that we didn't rehearse this. And I thought that, but we couldn't have rehearsed it. It was better than if we had rehearsed it. And each of us contributed in different ways to a coherent discussion. I really appreciated the whole thing, especially Surzan. I thought your presentation from Tamale, I've been in Tamale, and there's a lot of poverty, at least when I was there, there is a lot of poverty in Tamale. So, and then I thought the way you talked about the importance of food in people's lives and in their spirituality, and how then it's important, the Jubilee theme, and also the connection between poverty and the environment. It was an illustration of how people of faith can contribute in a distinctive way to policy thinking. I was interested, I gather that NGOs, Salo, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that NGOs can make statements of commitment and sign up as for the knowledge category of membership of the Alliance. Is that true? So just ways we can help. We can publicize this global alliance against hunger and poverty. It's not a household word yet. And so we can just use our own social media to let people know. And I think it's important in itself, but it's also important as a sign that the world hasn't given up on reducing poverty and hunger. So just using our social media. Andrea talked about joining the nutrition dialogues, and it's nutritiondialogues.org. That's pretty easy to find. We can learn more. Salo highlighted the 4 foundational documents, and I don't remember the website, but if you Google Brazil G20, it comes right up. And then it's under tracks. And it's all the documentation and other less formal documentation about the Global Alliance, so you can become more informed. Asma invited us to sign the letter that is organized by the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. And she gave us the detail where you find it, but if you go to SDG2 Advocacy Hub, you find them. And not only the letter, they're a good source of ongoing information about how the Alliance is moving forward. So I think we've seen, I just thought I want to stress the Jubilee. I think that's an opportunity. Salo, maybe you could really make an effort to get the Vatican to sign up for the Alliance. Because as I see things, there are the 2 personalities, big personalities in the world, celebrities in the world that are most committed to this issue are President Lula and Pope Francis. And they really are, and they're complementary. Surzan talked about how the Pope's call for 2025 as a year of Jubilee is a call to reform the public financial architecture that affects poor and hungry people around the world. It's very timely and very much aligned. So if there'd be some way to have the Secretary of State of the Vatican or somebody from the Vatican as one of the champions, it would make sense. Or at least people from Brazil should be going to the Vatican to find out what they're doing. Anyway, there are a lot of things that we can do. And in doing these kinds of things, I mean, I just think healthy, robust spirituality includes not just are we at inner peace, but are we connected to other people on the planet? And the launch of this new Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty gives us a new opportunity to connect to people on the planet, and it'll make us more joyful and make our lives more meaningful.
Thank you very much, David. And I do want to thank each and every one of you for your remarkable and very inspirational contributions to this discussion. There are many other people who could have contributed. There are many different religious traditions. We focused here mostly on the Christian traditions, but every other tradition has parallel traditions, teachings, and very practical actions. We will be posting the video recording of this event on the two websites, as I said, the Berkeley Center and the G20 Interfaith, alongside a lot of other materials. There was a very robust discussion that David and Andrea were part of, Asma was part of by video during the G20 Interfaith Forum in Brasilia in August. So that is available, the recording, but also the brief, which Saulo mentioned, which basically sets out the arguments of why this is a priority recommendation coming from the network of religious traditions. Not that something different be done, but supporting the G20 presidency in its recommendation and in its formation of the alliance, seeing the religious communities of the world as central players, central actors in this global alliance. So all those materials will be available, and I'm sure we'll all be writing and thinking in the months ahead, both coming up to the G20 Social, which Saulo mentioned, which is a coming together of the wide variety of civil society organizations in Rio just before the Leader Summit. And we're very hopeful that the Leader Summit will also focus sharply on a determination to revitalize and to come to real results on this goal, SDG 2 of ending hunger, but also of ending poverty and dealing with the root causes. So we will be following up, addressing the questions that people raised, but also looking forward with what are the practical steps. David mentioned several things that people listening can do and encourage others to do. And we very much see this as a central activity for the alliances, the networks that are so deeply committed to making a better world and to ending poverty, and above all, first and foremost, making sure that children everywhere, people everywhere, are not hungry, are not starving. So thank you all so much, and have a delightful day and evening.